Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo, and we're here today with some more Star Citizen. We're actually in the PTU, the Public Test Universe. We're taking a look at the recently added flight training tutorial. Really had no intention of checking out the latest PTU until I found out that this was in there. There's a lot of small bits and pieces and changes that have come along with this latest update, and most of them are present and represented inside of this flight training tutorial, which, by the way, is just of the utmost quality. Yes, it's filled with bugs and it has some small issues, and obviously the game is still really early in development, and lots of those tiny pieces kind of affect the enjoyment level of this tutorial, but as a whole, it is a really amazing experience. It's just presented in such a fantastic way. If Squadron 42 is presented anything like this at all, I think that will be an exceptional single-player campaign. This is probably one of the best ways that a new player could be introduced to the mechanics of the game. And the cool thing is, no matter how you change your key bindings, as all tutorials should do, your current key bindings will be represented in the tutorial. So, you know, if you're somebody who just never really understood where all the keys were, or you've made a recent change to gamepad, HOTAS, or mouse and keyboard, you can boot up this tutorial once it goes live into the actual public universe, and you can find out where all the key bindings are and learn how all they work, and then tweak them to your pleasing. So the other great thing about this tutorial is we actually are allowed to take off from inside of the asteroid hangar, which is just a really fantastic experience. It definitely shows how much still needs to be done in terms of controller refinement. And a lot of people who have been watching these takeoff videos, I've seen comments on other YouTubers' videos like, you know, dude, could you be any more, you know, fast? Like, slow down, be gentle. There is actually a lot of reported bugs already confirmed by CIG in this build, most of them doing with acceleration and the inability for a player to gently and gradually accelerate the ship forward or backwards. It's pretty much impossible, and it always has been. That's just the nature of the game because of the environment that they were developing it in. They never had a reason to make sure that the player could slowly increase throttle before. It was just kind of a on or off thing, which made landing and taking off in this case very difficult. They recognize that it is something that is going to be patched in a future release. Hopefully it'll be patched before this actually goes live. They have delayed this latest update, 1.1.2 I believe it's called, to next week. So you won't be seeing it till next week. They're going to try and refine a lot of the small issues that people have been running into. But either way, if you're somebody who is in the PTU, you know, even if you just feel like letting it download for the night and getting into the PTU, I think this is worth checking out almost immediately if you're a huge Star Citizen fan. I've had a lot of enjoyment with this flight training tutorial. I've played it about 4 times now, and things have always gone differently, sometimes because of bugs, sometimes just because of my own personal skill issues. But either way, it's a really fantastic experience, and I definitely wanted to talk about it. Because I think it definitely sets the precedent for Squadron 42, obviously. You know, seeing how we're going to be able to fly alongside of other ships. And one of the biggest elements that was introduced that I've never really made use of before, and I don't think it actually worked properly in Free Flight and in the other game modes, was the ability to actually lock on and follow another player's ship. This is something that was available in the old games like Freelancer and Wing Commander. Basically, for me, using the Xbox One gamepad, double tap the right bumper, locks on to whatever ship I'm targeting, and it keeps pace with it. It can be an enemy or friendly ship. To me, this just makes perfect sense. Obviously, there are situations when you're going to be in a chase, and manually following the ship is going to be the best bet. But in a normal combat scenario, being able to let your ship take control of the throttle so you can focus on all the other things that you're going to be doing, decoupling, recoupling, you know, using your yaw, strafing, all of that, is just a really nice touch, and it makes perfect sense to me. Don't know if that's something that they'll consider introducing into the multiplayer component of the game. There may be a lot of people who have an issue with that, but I think it makes perfect sense in a single-player environment like Squadron 42 and the training tutorial here. We also get a really good first glimpse at one of the first ever NPCs in the game, Gilly. You know, he's this sort of hardened dogfighter. He's flown a ton of different ships, as he tells you right from the introduction, and he's the one who's doing the training with you. And for something so early on, just the voice quality is outstanding. You often see games that, you know, talk about MMOs specifically, that talk about how they're going to have fully voiced characters, and the game's in beta and they just have like plugs put in, and it's just kind of all whatever. Apparently CIG just has voice actors, like, you know, on speed dial, like 2 blocks away from them, because the guy who did Gilly did a really bang-up job. It fits the game really well. Like, I wouldn't expect this to be replaced. If they kept his voice and everything that he's done moving into Squadron 42, kept him as an actual character, I'd be ecstatic, because I already really like the guy. There are bits and pieces of annoying elements to him. They kind of made him the classic sort of, you know, squad leader, where if you're having a small defect with your controls and you can't accelerate to get close enough to him, he'll start shouting at you. He'll get really pissed off if you try and get into his ship when you're in the hangar, as I've seen people try. But otherwise, all around, a really bang-up job for one of the first actual NPCs that you communicate with inside of Star Citizen. And I think a really good representation of what we can see for the NPCs and the story characters moving forward for Squadron 42. So very exciting indeed. Now, I actually want to get a little bit sidetracked here and talk about the sensitivity options and the controls and the way that you currently modify them inside of the game, because I think this is something that a lot of people aren't aware of. A lot of people who might be using a gamepad like myself or a HOTAS might be going into that controller option thing and just start screwing with those sliders. Now, there's something I realized a couple weeks ago when I was tweaking around, messing around with the game in Free Flight, and that is all of those sliders now have their own curves. And for those of you who don't know, curves are basically the way sensitivity and the way maximum sensitivity is delivered. It's kind of complicated to explain, but it's actually really simple in the way that it works. All you need to know is that once you start screwing around modifying those sliders, you are resetting the curve to be a perfectly diagonal line, one that goes from the base of 0, to the max of, you know, whatever speed and the amount of pressed on your stick or on your mouse, whatever it may be. You don't want that. That's bad. That means that you're going to get really flat sensitivity. There's not going to be a nice smooth increase, and that's going to make controlling the ships very, very difficult. So you have to be sure that you maintain those curves and that you just modify them when you want to decrease your sensitivity. And I know that's much more difficult than it seems. It is definitely something that takes a lot of time, learning how to modify those curves. It's what makes tweaking any sort of controller option in this game extremely frustrating currently. But I just want to make that aware to people who may not realize that you have to mess with those curves. You're going to delete those curves if you change the sensitivity slider, and everything's just going to get worse. It doesn't matter how low you turn down that sensitivity. If you think your yaw is too high, don't just nerf that slider. It's going to make it much, much worse. Trust me. I've realized that. You want to just modify that curve, or, you know, just kind of get used to it. You're better off doing that than screwing with those sliders. So keep that in mind. Now, one of the things that we get to see inside of the training mission is, I mean, it's really the first example of our systems actually shutting down and some of the smaller mechanics being introduced into the game, right? So, at one point in this tutorial, you're engaged by a couple vandals, actual vandals, right? Not just training drones. The vandals actually disable your weapons in your ship, and it takes a while for them to come back online. So this suggests that in Squadron 42, maybe even in the persistent universe, your ship systems can be taken down. As they've talked about this before, it's not really anything new, but they could be repaired over time and allow them to come back on, even in a fighter, something that would just have maybe an AI taking care of those sorts of systems. Now that adds a definite sort of longevity to a dogfight. It means that just because your weapons have gone down, unlike an arena commander currently, you can still get back in the fight by being evasive. And I think that's great, because that's one of the things that I've really been concerned about, is just how long will dogfights last, whether it be with another player or with an AI, when we're out inside of the PU or in Squadron 42. Lengthy, really well-crafted dogfights are what, to me, will sort of be the best moments in combat in Star Citizen. I mean, it's why I like the combat in Elite Dangerous so much, and I think that it can only get better in SC with all of these environments that are littered with asteroids and different objects. You're not just out in open space because of the way SC handles its flight system. It's much more like a first-person shooter than it is like an actual flight game, as we're Elite, as I've said many times before, is much more like a flight game and a lot less like an FPS. So that's something I'm very, very excited for. I like the way those mechanics are all working. At the end of the tutorial, we actually got to see our ship have a radioactive leak in its radioactive core, which forces us to set a self-destruct sequence on the ship because it's military intel. We can't let the Vandal get their hands on it, and then actually go ahead and eject. So that was cool to actually see one of the other systems that we're going to have in ships, the self-destruct sequence, in action. You could actually sit inside the ship and then die along with the ship. That's not something you're going to want to do, but it is most definitely possible. Now, only for a brief moment when you're running towards your ship in the beginning of this tutorial do you get to feel the new sort of first-person camera controls and animation system, and it all feels so much better even than what I saw when they showed the game off in PAX East, or PAX Australia, and afterward for the FPS module. I thought that kind of looked rough. It's obvious that they've made huge strides in that. It feels so much better, and I could see myself actually holding an assault rifle, playing the FPS module, and having that feel really good, not as stiff and as rigid as it has appeared in past videos. So excited to see that coming a very long way. The only thing that I would love to see them focus on, again, I know anything with track IR is not priority, but if they would just attach our actual head and helmet to the track IR rather than having it being a separate view camera, we could physically move our entire helmet and head inside of the cockpit without clipping while using track IR. Maybe one day we'll get there. That would be a really nice feature, because right now track IR is a bit frustrating to use. You really cut through the new helmet more than you ever have before, and you pop out of the side of the cockpit. It's just kind of all a mess. So that's something I would like to see them maybe consider focusing on moving forward. Now, 1.1.2 happening next week. I think that kind of, I know it's not, they're not connected in any way. The FPS module has nothing to do with what these guys are doing with these patches. It's two different teams within CIG, but I think that kind of, you know, just says, hey, the FPS module definitely not ready yet. I think it's easily going to be another several weeks. I wouldn't be surprised if it's another month before we see the FPS module. And as they said in their one of the recent episodes of Around the Verse, or Meet the Developers, sorry, was it Meet the Producers? So many different shows they're doing now. Every time they think of something they can do in the FPS module, and when they realize they can make it happen in a reasonable amount of time, they go for it. And I'm all about that. You know, if there's a new system or something that you can add to make that a more fun experience from the get-go, go for it. You know, I'm in no rush. Take your time on that. So I'm really excited to see that moving into the future. And I'm also just excited to see more of this persistent universe Squadron 42 style gameplay. You know, if they do a tutorial like this for the FPS module, I think that would be absolutely stunning. This is just, it really is so well presented to the player. It feels like a true piece of a single player campaign, and I'm really, really happy to have had the opportunity to experience it, and I can't wait to see it come to Stable Branch, hopefully sometime next week. If you guys have been checking this out in the PTU, let me know what you think of it. Have you been having a lot of fun, you know, just getting introduced to your first bits and pieces of sort of single player Star Citizen? And if you haven't played it, let me know what you think of it. Let me know if you're excited for it. And I'll see you in the next one.